This conference will now be recorded.
All right, we're recording now, so I'll hand it off to Mike Treese, who's our other judge and co-chair for the Heart of Ohio. And Mike, if you wanted to say anything about the co-host, the Indiana chapter, you can, and then you can jump into your slides. We can all see your screen.
All right. As some of you know, I'm involved in 5 different chapters. I'm the chairman for the Indiana chapter, and as Nick said, I'm co-judging chairman and events person for Heart of Ohio. I also belong to Michigan, the Dayton, Miami Valley chapter, and the Queen City chapter in Cincinnati. Trying to participate in them as much as I can. With that, I guess we will get started here. The first slide is we're going to do C1s to start with, 53 through 62s. The 53s, it's not actually an air cleaner. GM's name for it was an air inlet extension. It's a chrome round piece with kind of a domed lid on it. The manufacturer and patent pending is embossed in it. There's an anchor screw at the bottom. It is a round head slotted screw. It anchors onto the carburetor base. It's about 2 9/16 in diameter, and as you can see inside the unit, there is actually no filter media at all. There's just 3 openings on the bottom, kind of a rectangular with rounded corners with a screen over that. When they are installed properly on the car, the screens will be in the down position. The anchor screw is where the arrow is down there. It's at the 5 o'clock position. There should be a little scribe line at the top of the unit that lines up with the center of the top of the carburetor. With the openings at the bottom with these side draft carburetors, any fuel that might accumulate there can actually run out and not cause a problem. And these actually ran through early 54 till approximately VIN number 2900, and then they went to what they called the dual pot air cleaners. These were actually had filter media in them. They are held on by 2 stamped wing nuts. They were approximately 6 1/4 inches in diameter. These wing nuts, I do not have a lot of information on them. I'll get into that kind of as we go on through. As you can see, it's about 6 1/4 in diameter. They sit on top of a manifold. There is a manufacturer's embossed at the back leg going into the carburetor. They are held on by a filter head slotted screw with a clamp around to the 3 different carburetors. At the bottom of the manifold, there's an opening for any fuel that might accumulate in there from the side draft to leak out. The filler media is kind of a shredded steel or aluminum in different spots and different areas. The lids are kind of chrome, round, domed, smooth. They don't have indentation or raises on them like some of the passenger cars. And this one here actually shows a solid wing nut, but I believe the most of them I've seen here are the stamped steel ones, which should be on there. 55, we get the V8 engine. We went to a 1-piece. It's non-serviceable as far as changing the filter media inside it. It's 11 3/16 diameter across the top. Across the bottom, it is 12 1/16 inch. There is 3 spot welds in the center that holds the keeper for the spark arrestor material in there. And in 55, there is no indentations in the bottom for relief from the carburetor area for the choke or anything. As in 56, you will see that there is reliefs in there for some things. There you can see the 3 spot welds kind of in the middle. The spark arrestor stuff, we'll get into that a little more later here. It kind of wears off and you kind of see these cords, but originally there should be media over them cords. Here's the 56. You can see basically the top is the same. There's 4 sets of louvers going down the sides. And there you can see the indentation in the bottom for clearance for choke and various other parts that we'll get into later on the different ones. There's reliefs for all that stuff. This is the only thing I could find on the early wing nuts, and it is a wider opening in the middle in here than the later ones. I can't really give you any more information than that right now. How do I get rid of my pointer, Nick?
Hit the arrow icon that's down there.
Okay, gotcha. Here's a close-up of the earlier wing nuts. You can see there is a little more opening around the threads than as of the later ones. The later ones is actually what they call a type B. We will get into the type A here in a little bit. And I'm not sure what they call these. Like I said, I can't find a whole lot of information on the 54, 5s, and 6s. There's a side view of it. You can see it does have kind of the stress marks like the later ones do, and it is pretty straight up and down like the later ones are. The flame arrestor material is held in by a piece of metal with upturns on them. The single 4-barrel units have a 3/4 raise upturn, and you'll notice they are all on the same side of the metal there. Some of the reproductions, different sides go to the other side on some of them. Here's some of the close-up of some of the filter media that's used in these. As you can see, it is kind of a shredded, I don't know whether it's a steel or aluminum. I've seen references to both. If anybody's got any more information, whether it should be steel or aluminum, I think there's different years have different media in them. I'm not sure on that. Here's kind of a close-up of the louvered areas on these. They're 2 1/4 inches in length. The spacing between them is 1/4 to 1/2 inch. The louver openings are 1/8 to 3/16, and the earlier ones are 2 inches tall. Get into 56, you got dual 4s. They basically use 2 small round air cleaners in 56, 57 for the dual cars. They are 2 3/4 or 2 3/8 inches tall. They've got 4 louvers high as the single 4-barrels do. The louver width is about 2 1/4. The spacing between them, you can see there is 1/4 inch. And as far as I know, this particular filter is what we think an original piece. The top 6 1/2 inches wide. The bottom rim is 7 1/4. 57, you can see the base motor, his single 4-barrel. It's like the earlier ones, the 4 rows high. It's the same diameter as the 55, 6s. The 57 dual 4s. The original ones weren't quite polished that much. They were a kind of a semi-polished aluminum. This one particular one here is a dual 4 car. It's a small one, and the filler media should be a brownish color. Most of the time, if it's a gray color, it's an aftermarket.
Hey, Mike, the metal mesh that's in there as a filter, is that aluminum so it doesn't rust?
I'm not sure whether it's coated in gold cadmium or zinc or chromate type coating on them. So I imagine that coating, it's a steel with a coating on it from what I see here. And they did use two different types of screens here, the smaller holes and the bigger holes. So I'm not sure randomly, what they used and what. I'm sure there was more than one manufacturer, and I'm sure they probably used what they had. Because in a lot of cases through some of this stuff, there's more than one die or manufacturer that does a lot of this stuff, so you do get some variations. 57, when they come out with the fuel injection, the first air cleaner was a sealed unit. It had louvers along the side, you can see here. It had 3 takeoffs on the vacuum for different parts of the motor. You can see it mounted here. One of the takeoffs went over to the fuel metering side. The other 2 on the very first fuel injection units went down to the fuel injector blocks themselves. And that was just on the first unit. After that unit, they blocked them 2 off with red plugs. You can actually see it here. I do have some questions on the wing nuts on these. You can see this one here is a stamped steel, and I will get into that just here in a few more slides. But you can see the top one does go over to the fuel metering side, and the bottom 2 do go down to the air blocks. And I know that is the wrong valve cover in that motor, so if anybody wants to say anything about that, I do know that. They did away with the sealed unit not too long, about halfway through the run. They went to a serviceable paper type air cleaner. This was the lid. It did have some, as you can see, some flame resistant material spot welder. It's underneath the screen that is spot welded to the lid. They used the same basic adapter plate with the 3 tubes for a while. It had an indexing mark, so they could not get them on in the wrong spot. They went to a single adapter plate later on for the 4800 fuel injection units. The air cleaner that was used in there is a A56C. The original units had the blue ends on them. And the airbox cars had a filter inside of the fiberglass housing that brought the air back into it. You can see this is a later car because it does have the single tube off of the adapter plate going in. And you see here, it's got what they call a wing bolt to hold that in there. And there is a part number for that nut, which I'm going to get into that here too. Because right here you've got the single 4 is the wing nut part number is a 117204, which is a solid wing nut. It's not the stamp type. So I've got some questions here because the AI or the judging manual calls for a stamped wing nut, and it's the only thing they mention in the judging manual for 57. And you go on, here is the GM motor engineering standard for the wing nut. And as you can see, the 117204 is right here. And there is a number 2 numbers above that is the one they call for inside of the air box. And it is a 1/4 inch diameter with 20 threads per inch. So it is a regular coarse thread 1/4 inch bolt. And over on this side right in here, it gives you the finishes for them. There is, and this is kind of hard to see, and I can't really blow it up to get it better, but it tells what finish is on each particular part number there. Whoa, I lost a couple slides here. Okay, well, I'll have to move on. 58, we went to a different air cleaner. It is 14 inches in diameter. In 58, they started using the solid wing nuts, which come off of that chart back there. They used them through 62. The base motors and the 2.4s used basically the same size air cleaner. The 2.4s just had 3 indentations in the top, with 2 of them being punched down through. They were not, they did not have like a brass grommet through there. They were just punched down in kind of a rolled bottom. As I said before, they were lightly polished aluminum. They weren't highly polished like you see most of them at the judging meets. There's a bottom side picture of the 2.4s. You can see the filter media in there with the holder piece that's in there. The 2.4 holder piece is a little different. It had 1-inch fold ups kind of in the middle. You can see the punched areas here where the goes through the holding studs, and the wing nuts go on the top. This is taken apart. This is a sealed unit still here, but this has been disassembled so you can see what the inside looks like. The flame arrested pads are a let me get this right. It's a jute and a goat hair mixture, and it is sandwiched. There's a jute cord, 1/4-inch cord, like mesh in the middle to kind of hold it all together, that's what most of the time you see, because the jute and the goat hair kind of fall off or get burned up as the cars go on. There's different textures used in that. It varies on through the years. I mean, it's what the texture actually is. The sealed units from 58 to 60 were 1.5 inches high. They only had 3 louvers on them. Basically, the spacings are about the same as what I showed you before on the earlier ones, width-wise and spacing between the louvers. 58, the 57s had a fiberglass box. 58, they made a metal area or metal box to hold the air filter. As you can see, this is pretty original old car. The ducting come in was just used on the higher horsepower cars. The 250 horsepower just had a screen in this area, no tube running up through the radiator piece up there. The 58s had a large X. The 59s had a large X. 60s up 61s had a large X here. 62, they changed that. Early 58s, there was a stud sticking out with a wing nut. Later in 58, they went to a what they called a wing nut or wing stud, which was the wing nut was actually welded on the end of the threaded area, and it should be painted black. There's a close-up of the filter unit. You can see it had brackets on top and bottom to mount it to the fender well. This particular one here has the wing nut on the it's on the stud, not welded to it. Early from 58 to 61, the instructions was in reddish orange. It was viewable inside the fender barely. You had to kind of look back under the fender to see all of it. They used an A77C filter in these. The clamps that held the ducting tubes to the unit was something like this. There's a couple different variations in the bolt heads. We'll get into that here in a little bit. They should have a number 20 on them. And I'll show you a difference between a new or the slotted head was used mostly in 61. They had a hex head that had a slot in it. Why just that 1 year was like that, I don't know. Here's an aftermarket versus an original clamp. When you're judging, I know that's going to be really hard to differential from, but kind of after you see it, you can kind of see some differences down in here, the way the fold goes under, and you can see how much longer the reproductions are than the original clamps here. Here's an original tube. It's a fabric covered duct with wires in it versus a coil, or the reproduction. The coils are usually a little different spacing. The original ones are really hard to, I mean, once you see one, you can tell it right away from the reproductions. Here's an original air cleaner from this is actually from 58. This is the real deal, what they really look like. You can see the screening around it. It's kind of welded at each joint, like most of the later ones are, overlap, welded together. Um, 58 through January of 60, they just had one single strap holding the tube to the fender well, and they were having some problems with the hood support, evidently catching them right in here. So later in 60, they went to a different thing. They had like a J clamp at the front to kind of hold it away from the area on the hood support, and they had another clamp back in here. And I'm not sure if that did not cure the problem completely. And from May of 60, they put two clamps back in there, plus the J clamp at the front. Just one of them things. In 60, you could get three different ways that it's held to the fender. 59, you still got a single piece. It's not separatable. It's a sealed unit. The you can see it has more relief areas on this than the earlier ones did. In 60, late 60, they changed to the two-piece air filter, where the filter inside was of a foam media. It was, you could actually service it, take it apart, and the filter number was an A98C. The early, or the 60 through 61 and some of the early 62s had a large AC and a circle off to the side. Later 62s has a little different instruction thing. There's an index tab on these two-piece units. It's 1 inch and 3/8 for the WCFB carburetors. Here's the second style used in 62. They went from 2,000 miles to 8,000 miles right here on the spacing between service instructions, and you can see the big AC is missing from over here. They put the AC in a little circle above the instructions. And if you had an AFB carburetor, you only had an inch spacer in here. And this was to index it so you couldn't get it on wrong, and the relief areas would be in the right areas. 62 base motor. You can see they still use it looks just like the sealed units, basically, but it's a two-piece unit where you can get the foam inside. The foam was put over this wire support that went around the inside unit, and it pretty much pushed the foam filter out toward the bent areas. This is a foam filter. I'm relatively sure that this is a later reproduction, because I can't believe the foam filter would be that good a shape still to get this picture. But it does have an embossed part number in the foam itself. When they went to the two-piece filters, we had a change in the height of the turnups. It went down to a 1/16 inch. I suppose that might have been partially, it shouldn't have had any clearance problems with the foam filter, so I'm not really sure why they might have went down that low. But here you can kind of see the flame arrestor material is pretty good toward the outside. The inside, you can kind of see where it is burned off or fell off around the area where the carburetor is. Here shows the foam filter inside the unit, and the flame arrestor in these were smaller diameter. The openings were 3 1/4 wide, 1/4 to 1/2 inch spacing. They were 1 1/2 inches tall. The openings were 1/8 to 3/16, and you can see this was a 60 to somewhere in the early 61s, because it does have the large AC inside the circle there. 62, I told you they changed the X. It's smaller on the box here. You can see there's it has the later clamping. There's a clamp here, and the J clamp up in here. The filter box is kind of basically the same as the earlier one, other than the big X went to a small X. You can see this does have the welded wing nut on the stud. They changed filters in the 62s, and you can see they changed the instructions to a yellow rather than the red orange. The filter went to a 145C instead of the 77. The 145 went over a screen, and it was a foam filter also. I could not find an original foam filter. I know this is a replacement. I kind of surmised that all these foam filters from that age have deteriorated to the point where you can't even find one. I can see the foam filter fitting over the screened area. And we'll take a break now before we go into the C2s. I know there was some questions or some stuff there. Nick, do you want to bring up any of them? Or
I had one question regarding the stamped wing nuts, whether it's C1 or C2. What do you think is the easiest way to differentiate an original versus a reproduction? Is it the finish or the thickness of the steel?
the stamped ones?
Yeah.
I'll get into that more in the C2s, because the stamped ones back there, I really don't have a lot of information on the C1 stamped ones.
Okay.
Other than that one picture. But we get into the C2s, the what they call the B series of the wing nuts. The solid one was what they called the A series. So I'm not sure what they really called the stamped wing nuts from 54 to 56, 57 area.
Okay. If anybody else has any questions, you could unmute yourself, or you could type it in the chat box. Right now, I'm not seeing any questions that haven't been answered.
I seen Dan Addy put something up there one time through there. I don't remember what it was for sure, on something on the air boxes or something.
Let me see, maybe I missed that one. No, I don't see it on my end.
Okay. All right. Has anybody else got anything
could
to
have,
add or like
It
to?
could have been a
Here
direct
he puts
message
it
to
up here
you.
again. Now I lost it again.
Yeah, he might have directly sent you the chat instead of everyone.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, this is Wes. Just real quick, I'm always interested in how they manufacture some of these. So I'm assuming all of this was done by suppliers, but with the constant changes that you've highlighted, and they're actually sometimes in the middle of a model year, it seems like they were constantly doing design and engineering changes back to their suppliers to update. Do you know if they were getting feedback from the field or what was driving those changes? Thanks.
I know some of the stuff was done because after they did it, they found out that it was kind of hard to access or do some stuff. So I'm sure some of the changes was due to improvements to make things a little easier and better. Otherwise, I really don't know. I'm sure they got some feedback back in the day when they were racing a lot of the 57s and that with the air boxes and the air cleaners or the 58s and 59s. I'm sure they got a lot of feedback from the racers of different things of what worked and what didn't work, so they could change stuff, make it a little better.
Probably from the dealers as well, right? Service guys.
I'm sure. Does anybody have any comments or any other thing they'd like to say on that?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
My first comment was when you were reviewing the 58 to 61 Fuelie air breather.
Yes.
The one showed that you used as an example appeared to be the first reproduction.
Okay.
Reason I say that is the first reproduction was made of fiberglass, and you'll note that the mounting bracket is riveted to the body. The originals were spot welded because they were steel. Obviously, you can't spot weld to a fiberglass piece.
Yes.
The other thing I wanted to say was the small X62 FI breather. That was done because the new 327 didn't breathe as well. You just went past it, Mike.
Yeah, there's an original there.
Yeah.
Versus that, you can say this the
Right.
rivets on there.
And
So
if
you
you,
think
if
that's
you look in the mouth of it, the air intake side, it's not smooth stamped steel, it's rough fiberglass.
okay?
So that's something the judge can look for. And now back to the 62 small X, that change was made because the new 327 didn't breathe as well with the old 58 to 61 air breather. So they changed the air filter situation inside.
That's why they went to the foam filters rather than the old paper media filters then, to get the breathing up a little better.
They needed to improve the breathing.
Okay.
That change came around. It's it's like a lot of changes. There's no definitive line. I think it's somewhere around the 4,000 or 5,000 serial number cars.
It's when they went to the small X.
Yeah.
So the early 62 should even somehow will still have the large X.
That's right.
Breathers. Okay. Is there any other comments? Thank you, Dan, very much. Appreciate it. Any more comments on the C1 stuff? If not, I had to get a drink. If not, we'll go on to the C2 stuff. 63 to 67s, and I've got some more questions and areas on this. So When I get there, I will bring that up. 63 to 65 style base motor had what they call the dual snorkel. 63 is actually a 1 year only because the vent tube come out the front, went up to the oil filler tube. It was smaller than the later ones, and it had no flame arrestor on the inside. And if you had an air conditioned car, it even gets crazier because you had tabs in here to rotate it 5 degrees for clearance around the alternator area and some hose areas. You can see a non-AC car versus an AC car has some extra tabs in the center hole. 63 versus 64, 65. You can see a difference in the vent tubes. The small one coming out the front here for the 63. The bigger one comes out the back and went to the vent area at the back of the block on the 64, 65s. And it also had a flame arrestor over that. And also 64, 65s, you had the extra tabs in there for indexing it away from the alternator brackets and stuff for the AC cars too. This filler here it's out of a low mile 63, but again, like I said, I cannot hardly believe that's an original filter. The foam, I can't believe it lasted this long. So I'm venturing to say that this is probably and reproduction, but it should have the AC 165C embedded in the foam itself. The lids were 15.5-inch diameter. In 63, this is off of a low mileage 63, and you can see it's kind of a reddish, some people call it a gold paint or silk screen. And you can see the center has got a rolled area. It's not really it's just pushed through and stamped. It's not a bushing or anything through there. And it's not sharp edges. If you see a sharp edge when it's drilled, that is definitely a reproduction.
Hey, Mike, quick question.
Yeah.
It was back on C1s. The question was asked if you knew anything about the 58 to 62 forged wing nuts versus the stamped.
Yeah, I had a sheet on them back in there. That GM engineering sheet showed all of the wing nuts, and the two that's listed in the AIMs is on that sheet. I could send somebody a copy of that sheet if they want it. It's kind of hard to decipher it on the computer because I can't get it blowed up big enough so everybody can see what's going on. And if I do blow it up big enough, it distorts it pretty bad.
Okay, yeah, feel free to reach out to Mike, anyone, if you want any additional information on that. All right, that was it.
Okay, move on. 63 through 65, the higher horsepower small blocks had carbureted small blocks had a chromed air cleaner top bottom, had 7 cutouts in the back, rectangular cutouts toward the back of the air cleaner itself. Again, in 63, it's a 1 year only because it's got the small pipe and it goes up to the front vent. It vents through the filler tube, where later cars it goes to the back. It has a flame arrestor on it, like the smaller ones. There you can see the flame arrestor. I don't know if I got a better shot of that or not later on here, but it does have 4 dimples around the top, and it does have a GM stamped around or somewhere on that bottom ring that down here around the bottom, there's a ring that holds the screening, and it does have a GM stamped in that also. There's obviously different molds or different presses, and you can see there is a little variance between the two. I'm assuming that both of these are original. I'm not sure whether one of them, this one could be a remanufactured or a reproduction, but I've seen both styles here where it's more of a dome, and this has got more of a flat area on the top. If anybody else can comment on that, feel free to type something in and speak up. Yeah, here you can kind of see the flame arrestor with the 4 indentations, and down at the bottom here, I guess you can't really see, there's a GM stamped right in here. There's you can see the GM stamped on this one pretty good right there. The lids for the higher horsepower cars were chromed with the silk screen kind of in the middle. It was a black silk screen. This is what they call the Type B wing nut. This is the breakdown of it from what I found. Here you can see the difference between an original and a aftermarket. This here is an aftermarket. You can see how much thicker the material is in this area than the original. You can kind of see here a side view of how this is kind of rounded here, where the originals are pretty much straight up and down. You can see some draw marks on this original right here. There's maybe a little better picture of some. If that helps anybody. You can see pretty much straight up and down. You can see the draw marks right in this area where the aftermarket's kind of got a round edge on it. And you can see the difference maybe a little better on this one, the thickness of the metal on the side.
Hello, Mike.
Yeah.
Just before the wing nuts, you mentioned the chrome high horse
Yeah.
lids with the silk screen.
Yeah.
On 63.4, the silk screen was a reddish color.
Red. Yes.
65 is black.
Okay. Okay. I knew the 63s, the ones I had seen were red, and the later, I assumed these were later on with the black ones.
Yeah, black is 65.
Okay. So 63 and 64 are both red.
I believe so.
Okay. There you can see the pull marks on the wing nut real distinct on this one. I hope, does that answer your question, Wes, on the how to tell the original from the reproductions?
That was my question, Mike. Yeah, that helps.
Okay, Nick. Yeah, that kind of shows it pretty distinctive right there. I mean, the two areas to kind of look for right there. Okay.
Yeah, to your point, Mike, it looks like a deeper draw on the original, huh?
And in this area right in here, you're talking it's deeper than the aftermarket right in here.
Yeah.
Yeah. The big thing is you can see this this area right in here. You can see pretty distinctive, pretty easy. It shouldn't take too much. And if you look at the top, you got to be able to see. I mean, the opening in here is a lot narrower than it was in here. So I mean, if you see a few of them, actually, if you see them side by side like that, it makes it a lot easier to distinguish between a real one and a aftermarket. Any other questions on the wing nuts, or shall we move on? Okay, 63 fuel injection units had a whole lot different air cleaner setup than the C-1s did. Had a tube along the side come up, what they call an S tube to the filter body itself. The filter body itself was held in two pieces with these clamps on the back side. Had the instruction on the side. This should be a 63, 64 type instruction. The filter inside was over a screen, as it was earlier in the the late C2. The 62 C2s had a screen that held the foam filter. Again, I'm assuming this filter here is an aftermarket, because I can't believe the foam filter held up that long, but you never can tell. This is an early 63. You can see the latch is above this anchoring bracket here, which put this clamp down real close to the valve cover area, which made it very hard to get in and change the filter. Later, they moved the clamp more down closer to the bracket area, and that raised this up so it's above the valve cover, made it a little easier to get into. The 65, the number was added on the service instructions. '65, we come out with the big block. Now, here's where I'm getting into some issues. I've been calling for about 2 weeks on this, and everybody's got a different opinion that I've talked to. The lids on 65s were painted a semi-gloss black with white silkscreen on the underside for the instructions. The base plate. Okay, this is off of a 65. You can see this area is smooth, this area is smooth. The rest of these base plates, all of these areas are pretty much the same on big block and small block. We'll get into that here in just a little bit. But the 65, the original ones that I have seen are smooth right here. Later in 66, you're going to see a little bit of an indentation. Now, some people say that there was different presses to make these, so some of them may have had and some of them may not have had. As far as, I have not seen enough original cars that I can actually tell you one way or the other. The only thing I can tell you is that most 65 that seem to be original cars that I've looked at have the smooth area here. Most 66s that I've seen has an indentation there. Now, you can see it from the bottom side. It is pretty smooth. Here's a small block without the AIR or the K19 in 66. In 65, we were still using the chrome bases, so we did not use this style base on the small blocks in 65. But the overall general stamping of the small block and big block is pretty much the same. As you can see here, this is smooth, and this one here is smooth, and this has got to be from a 66 or later. And later on, you will see a depression or an indentation in this area. And this area here was used for the K19, the smog pump got its air through this area right here. There was a tube going up to the smog pump from this area. So I don't know whether in 66, you can see here, this is one with the AIR or the K19. This tube here went up to the smog pump. This unit here went back to the back vent area at the back of the block. It come up on an angle pretty much. So this is on an angle. This is pretty much a 90 shooting straight forward. The big blocks, here's a view of a small block versus a big block builder or a base plate. You can see the small block comes out on this side, goes down, goes to the back of the motor to the vent area. The big blocks come out on the right side, which goes over to the valve cover area. And then this area here was where the smog went up. And you can kind of see the indentation or the depression right here. Other than that, this area here is pretty much the same. This indentation on this area is pretty much the same. It looks like maybe the small block comes around maybe a little farther, but this picture is kind of hard to detect. This area here is pretty much the same, and this area here is pretty much the same. In 67, this changes. We'll get to that. This here is off a really original 66 4¼ horse. And you can tell these were painted by hanging on a hook. And the hook was right in here when this was painted. And you can see there was actually no paint on that air cleaner right in there. Everywhere else is pretty much covered other than where the filter set and around the flame arrestor back here. But this is a pretty good example of how they were hung to be painted. I mean, you can definitely see that area right there that there is no paint. And you can also see the depression right here on this 66, where it wasn't on the 65. So my theory, or what I think, is that was added in 66 when the K-19 come on board, and it had to have that opening for the air to go up to the air pump. If anybody's got any comments on that, I would really appreciate hearing them. Or if you can get pictures of what you think is a fairly original 65 396 or a 66 4¼ or 390 horse, because they both have this indentation. The only deal is the 4¼ horse 66 was K-19 exempt. No 4¼ horse had smog on it, just a 390 horse. Why California allowed that, I have no clue, but that's the way it was. Here you can see, I told you the 67 was different. This little bump here was added in 67. This particular unit, you can really see the depression. I'm pretty sure this is an aftermarket unit. But you can see the 65, they're smooth, both places here. '66, '67, the big block, the tube come out on a 9, actually the 65s too. This particular unit did not have the AIR, the K-19. Just this was going over to the valve cover. You can see it right there. It just comes straight out, goes straight to the valve cover. Here is a 66 390 horse with the AIR, and you can see the tube going up toward the air pump right here. Also on these, there was some brackets underneath that held this particular unit and some hoses on the other side. Right here you can see that there was a stud on one side that held the clamp, and there was a bracket on the other side which held a hose from the carburetor to the other air, or to the other valve cover. Right here you can see there is the stud welded, and here is the clamp that holds the hose. You can see this is an K-19 car because it has the extra tube coming out of it. And there's the top side of it. Where the tube that went to the air pump, there is no flame arrestor on it, just the one going to the valve cover area. Very early 66 had a decal on with 450 horse. That was not very long, and they changed it to the 4¼ horse. Why they made the change, the same motor, they did not change the motor at all. Whether it's for insurance purposes or whatever, I don't know, but that's what happened. This is a 212 filter. This is an original out of a 66. You can see that the screen area is more or less welded at each joint. You can see how it overlaps. The W at the end of the CW, the W meant it was wetted with oil. There you can see the embossed lettering on the filter itself, the type A212 CW, and the AC was on this side. It's a 69 or 66 390 horse label, I believe to be original label. We'll get into that here shortly too. The kind of some of the differences between the aftermarket labels and the originals. The coloring up in this area is different. There's just a lot of different areas that are just minute differences.
Hey, Mike,
So
this is Wes. Can you go back 2 slides or 3 slides? That one, yeah.
That one?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that is a, and I'm not trying to correct you, buddy. I think that is a steel mesh screen that's probably been dipped in zinc or galv for corrosion protection. And that artifact is where the intersection of where it is on the screen. I've seen that based on my kind of past metals processing stuff, but that's what I think that is.
So this is not really welded here. It's just more or less when it was dipped, it here
that's
to
an
there.
intersection of where it stepped, or it's an intersection of where it was from the galv dip. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I can go along with that.
All right.
I mean, like I said, I've ran into so many things that I really don't have any answers for, that I'm still trying to dig.
Well,
And if anybody does have answers, I'd appreciate it.
What happened 50 years ago, right? 60 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. And if anybody's got any answers, they can send me. Maybe we'll go back on part 2 of this and revisit some of this and bring them up to date.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, there's a lot of questions that, I'm sure some of the people that did this is no longer with us. But yeah.
Thanks. That's
okay. Here you can kind of see a little bit of the differences. It is kind of a different tone here. Actually, the bars seem to be a little different also, but it is fairly close. The area around the flags are a little different. I don't know, maybe Nick in the 67s, 67 team leaders on here. Nick, can you comment anything on these labels or reproductions versus the original labels? This here is an original 435 label. And one thing you can look at on these, one thing is the coloring here. The second thing is a lot of the reproductions, this made in USA comes clear over underneath the W, which I've got a pretty good picture of that here in a little bit. Here you can kind of see the difference in the coloring in this area and this area both. As far as the lettering and stuff, it's fairly close to being alike. There is a couple reproduction labels here. You can see in this one that the made in USA comes clear underneath the W, where the original it stops about in this area between the W and the E. This one don't even have made in USA on it. And there's what I was saying earlier, that the made in USA comes clear over underneath the W. You see that, you know that's definitely a reproduction. Now, whether that warrants a deduction, If you don't feel it warrants a deduction, it at least needs to be mentioned on the sheet so the guy knows that you know that that is not an original.
Okay, I just figured out how to unmute myself. The actual judging sheet line has 5 points for attachment, labels, hoses, and clamps.
Okay.
So you have to really kind of wonder whether that's worth making any too much of a comment about. I mean, because you have all those other items on there for 5 points total. It's okay to make a comment on it, but in reality, it's kind of de minimis. It's a situation where the point value, if you would work it out, would be a decimal point, probably less than 0.5 between all those items just for that printing. But if you see the whole label, I mean, then people say, well, you know, there's a guy with an original label and there's a guy with a reproduction label and they get the same credit. Well, unfortunately, that's the way the judging system works. If you want to make the comment, that's fine. But really, in terms of making a deduction, if I were an owner, I probably would say, hey, you know, there's a lot more on that line than you know, the position of that fine print below horsepower or the color of the thing. But the most you could take off would be 1 point, if even that, if it was a completely screwed up non-original label. Most of them aren't bad.
What about like this one here, Nick, where there is no made in the USA, and there is some differences here, but I don't know. I don't think there's actually enough there to warrant a point off. I mean, but you could mention that made USA is.
You have to think about how you're going to score. What are you going to call it? Configuration, probably.
Yeah.
And how much different is that when you take the entire configuration of the label into account?
Okay.
It's a pretty small portion. I mean, it's worth noting because, as I say, certainly an original part should have some higher level of recognition than a replacement part. But in this situation, it's really, as I say, it's such a small difference, and there's so many other things. I mean, they got 20 points for the air cleaner assembly, which seems high, and then only 5 points there for attachment, labels, hoses, and clamps. That means the wing nut is in the same situation. How much can you really deduct for that wing nut? You know, it gets to the point where it's worth a comment, but as far as deducting for it, it's a gray area.
Is the wing nut in with the label and that stuff, or is it in with the
wing nut is part of the attachment. So it's attachments, labels, hoses, and clamps for a total of 5 and 5.
So you don't have a whole lot to play with there.
No, you don't. And it's always been my beef is I think that the 20 and 20 on the air cleaner assembly, some of those points could come down into the other two items because the other two items, the more we learned about them, the more subtle details there are. But unfortunately, we have to follow the sheets in the CDCIF program that we're using. So in a lot of cases, the scoring is really diminished to the point where it's pointless.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Here's a 400 horse, which is basically the same as a 435 label, air cleaner, so forth. The base plate for the tri-power units it's held on by the 2 bolts at the front and back carburetor. This particular base plate is just a standard one. The 67 differs from the 68 because the 67 does not have the flame arrestor up here on the tube. The flame arrestor is down by the valve cover, if I'm correct on that. And the 68, they put the flame arrestor up here on the base of the air cleaner. That correct, Nick?
Yeah, I believe so. One of the questions I had was there was a depression. You can see it on your where your text is, where it says 68 with flame arrestor, there's a depression right by the front mounting hole in the rear of the line.
Right here?
Yeah, that, and that seems to vary from model year to model year. No, go back to where you, go back down.
Back this one?
Right there. That right there. You don't see
It
that.
looks a little wider on this one than it does on this one.
Yeah, there's a different configuration of that, but I'm still kind of doing some research on it. I think the Adams book showed that the smaller one was typical.
Okay, because that one there shows the bigger one.
Yeah, that looks like it's the larger depression.
Okay, well, that's
Again,
interesting too.
you know, there's those unanswered questions, and it's hard to really. We looked at the Adams book and we looked at the Dobbins book, which we would think would be less affected by reproduction parts, but I think they disagreed on that. So.
Huh. I didn't catch that part when I was going through all this, but there's so many things to look at on this. It was just unbelievable when I started doing this. The minor differences in all this stuff. Here is a car that had the K19. You can see it has the extra hole or the tube coming out here to take the air up to the air pump. This is the screen that goes inside that the foam filter goes around on the 3.2 cars. I don't know, is there a variance in the hole size on these, Nick? Or are they pretty much standard? Because I know some of the earlier ones, the hole size kind of varied on some of this screen stuff.
Yeah, that's generally, it's regarded as, if you can see 3 complete holes, it's regarded as an original. If you see 4 complete holes, then it's a reproduction. With the angle that this photo is taken, it's kind of hard to tell. But if you look at it directly on, I believe the spaces between the holes, the actual metal that's left after it's been stamped,
yeah,
there's a difference there, that it'll be smaller or larger.
I'll see if I can find a better picture to put in here then.
Yeah, if you're going to look at that, you want to look at it straight on.
Okay. Here's a foam filter. Have you found many original foam filters in the judging of these, Nick, or are most of them reproductions?
I've had original ones that folks have had on the screen, not exactly on the car, but I think, I'm trying to think of that maroon car that is starting to show up in Arizona that he bought from Varillo, if that had an original element on it. I don't believe so.
Most of
the original ones would probably fall apart right now. So
yeah, that's why I say most of the original foam it don't last that long. So if you ever find an original one, it's probably going to be mostly in pieces.
Yeah, from between the engine heat and all the vapors and stuff under the hood, and the Holley carburetors, you know, the amount of fumes that they allow to be admitted and all that. I don't think any originals survive unless the owner took it off and saved it. But I can tell you, I worked at a gas station back then, and the first thing that went in the trash when a car came in for a tune-up was the air filter element and the windshield wipers.
Okay, here's a silk screen, and I'm gonna bring this up. You can see where this stops right here at the D, and if you look over here, this reproduction comes in. Just another thing to note. I don't know how many points there is on this, but I'm sure there's not that much that you can probably make a big deduction or anything on this. You even make a deduction on this, but like I said, you can at least show that you know a little bit about it if you can kind of see where these ends stop on this original versus that reproduction. Anything you can say there, Nick?
Well, fortunately there you do have 20 points to work with, because that would be the silk screen. Well, it depends. If you want to call the silk screen a label, then you're still back in the 5-point area, divided up with the other things. But if you're going to call that silk screen part of the, not call it a label, but call it part of the lid, then you might have a little more to work with there, because there's 20 points total there for the air cleaner assembly, which would be the lid and the base.
Another thing here, the size of the AC spark plug down here, it seems to be a little different, and the Flint, Michigan seems to be a little different. So, I mean, there is numerous variations on this. If you look at how the AC is in here, the C is a lot closer to the edges on this. So, I mean, there is a lot in this reproduction that is different from the original, but there again, you're judging the car, you're gonna have to make that call.
Yep, and the quality of the silk screening overall too, it's much sharper on the original than it is on the reproduction in some cases. In this
Nick
case, and the ARC ones, and you know, usually the originals are less clear than the reproductions.
Nick
This
is, I have a question. This is Dino. Is that silkscreen paint? What's the material that they use to put the black on? Is it paint or is it frit?
I really couldn't say. I don't want to make a guess. I'm not sure. I believe it has a texture to it that you can feel it, and it feels like paint, but it could be some sort of ink too. I really don't know.
there's kind of a close up of what I believe is an original one right there. I don't know if that kind of helps show anything that you can point out there too, Nick.
Yeah, it's just the fuzziness of it, and the thickness of, say, where you see Corvettes, or is that word, covers?
Covering.
Right, yeah, covering right there. Yeah, it's just if you study them enough, you'll see differences, subtle differences between the spacing, the thickness of the letters and stuff. But again, by the same token, they were making, 3,000 of these at least, so I guess they could vary. But the main thing is the layout, the configuration, those items that you pointed out, those are the most significant.
Okay.
Also, Nick, this is Gary on that 67 Joe Varela's car. I don't think the air filter was original. It looked too good a condition.
Yeah, probably not, because those things are pretty fragile. And as I say, the heat and that car had, I think, what, 40-some thousand miles on it. It would have been pretty well trashed.
Yeah, looking at all the pictures, it looked pretty good shape for that filter.
Yeah. I have seen originals and they're very expensive, but it's just somebody was either lucky enough to take them off and save it, or maybe they bought an early, over-the-counter dealer item that was the same. But the newer ones are completely different material.
There's kind of another close up of some of the silk screen there too. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair deduction for a non-OEM silk screen, because there are so many little parts of the configuration, and if you're going to call it part of the air cleaner, you do have more points to work with. But if you're going to call it a label, which I suppose would be debatable, then you don't.
It's really not a label though, is it, Nick? I mean, it is more part of the.
I would consider that part of the 20-point air cleaner housing, because it's not stuck on. A label is stuck on. This is actually painted.
67 L88s. I'm sure we're going to see a lot of these, but there was no provisions for any takeoffs on the 67 L88s. Base plate was just solid. No K19s, no breather to the air or to the valve cover or anything. This is pretty much the breakdown of the L88 air cleaner. The air cleaner itself is a foam unit up in the hood with a wire support holding it out to the edges. Just a screen and a lid coming over the carburetor, kind of more or less a spark arrestor, I guess. Anything else you can add to that, Nick? There's not a whole lot to it.
No, the only thing, I guess it would be more of an exterior item, but the underside of the hood, the cutouts, we're researching that, but some seem to have 2 and some have 4 going across in the back of the Stinger scoop.
Back in this area back here.
Yeah.
If you like right in that
where
area,
the air actually comes in. It's not part of the bottom, it's part of the hood itself. So that may even fall under chassis judging. So But that's just one of the interesting things to note, that the AIM shows it one way, and I've seen original LE hoods that are both ways. So I guess it was done online, and it depended on what the guy was cutting that day.
And that pretty much concludes my presentation on the C1, C2s. Few weeks we got C3s, 4s, and 5s, and we may come back and revisit some of this stuff from the C1, C2s if I get any more answers. Really appreciate everybody joining in today. I hope you got something out of this. I know I learned a lot doing it. And if anybody's got any information that they would like to share with me, I'm always open for that. As you can see, I like to get pictures of original cars as much as I can. If you know of any and can get me any pictures, I really would appreciate that too. And once again, I want to thank you. And if we got any more questions, we'll open it up and go from there.
We've got one question on the chat. It was going back to the C1s related to the forged wing nuts. For 58 to 62, were there any stamped wing nuts, or were they all forged?
They were all forged. There was no pressed wing nuts 58 to 62.
Okay. That's the only question I show right now on the chat. So if anybody else has any, you can unmute yourself. Or let's see here.
Great
Yeah,
work, Mike. Appreciate your effort.
Yeah, I think on behalf of the everybody that's on the call, this is Wes. You know, we had almost 85 people, probably from across the country, listening to Mike's technical presentation. I think we all can agree that we're never going to look at wing nuts the same as we used to. But
I hope so, Dino.
he's always taken a lot of time to kind of go through this, and we are very thankful and grateful for his information. So
I can tell you this, Wes, nobody knows nuts better than Mike Treese.
absolutely, right on. So if we
wouldn't
don't
say
have
that.
this has been our response to kind of the COVID, and I think we could use this in future, you know, when the weather's bad, that type of stuff. But we adapted as a club. We're still adapting to some of this craziness that's going on. But Mike has really saved us from a lot of. We keep wanting to have touch points with our club members, and as well as the national. So this is our way of doing it, and we are we would be out on a limb if we didn't have Mr. Treese and some of his presentations. So if anybody else has something, please let us know. We're gonna to Nick's point, I'll let Nick talk about how we're gonna store this. And so Nick, you want to go into that?
Yeah, I'd say sometime within the next week, everybody that has registered for this will get an email, and it'll have a link for you to view and download the entire recorded presentation. And we'll also be posting it, I believe, on our chapter website.
Perfect. Mr. Treese, you got the last word, buddy. Thank you again. Any final thoughts, comments?
Nope, I just want to thank everybody. And once again, I got to thank everybody that helps me. I send out emails. I've been on the phone. I know one guy on here today can actually testify that I called him at 8:30 this morning trying to verify some stuff. So, I mean, it's an endless thing. I try and keep these updated. And if anybody ever wants to see them later on, I will have a copy. And if I can get it to you or share it with you, more than happy to do that. And like I said, if anybody's got any other information that they could share with me, greatly appreciate it. Thanks
Mike,
again for everybody that joined.
Yep,
Thanks,
and Mike, one quick comment. There was a question regarding points. So everybody that attended at least half of the time of the technical talk today, which we logged the specific time you're in and out, if you were online more than half of that time, you will get one judging point, and you should see that come through in about a week or a week and a half. So with that, I will end the recording and close out the meeting. We appreciate everybody attending.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Mike. Great job.
Thank you.